People think baby showers are about cutting cake, opening gifts, and crying over tiny onesies. Mine turned into a low-budget Jerry Springer show, complete with an interloper, cell phone cameras, and a live public showdown. My name is Marcus Ellery, 38, a high school history teacher in Asheville, North Carolina. My job mostly involves convincing teenagers that Abraham Lincoln didn't own an iPhone and that the Boston Tea Party wasn't an actual British-style tea party. My life has always been steady to the point of boring. I own a small suburban house, a beer belly more reliable than gas prices in North Carolina, and a collection of ugly ties my mom insists on giving me every Christmas. I'm not rich, not remarkable, but I believed I had at least one thing: a stable marriage. Lydia, my wife, was different. She lived as if the whole world was a monthly issue of Home and Garden. To Lydia, the tablecloth had to match her nail polish, the flowers had to match the guests' outfits, and a dinner without candles that smelled like the hand soap was enough to make her look at me like I had broken my vows. I loved her, the way a history teacher loves the Constitution, knowing it's flawed, but staying loyal anyway. And then there was Kevin Doyle. Kevin was the kind of man who entered a room like he was waiting to be handed an Oscar. The only thing he actually owned was a bus pass and a half-baked smile. He was the type who unbuttoned one extra button on his shirt to show off a cheap necklace, thinking it said, "I'm irresistible," instead of, "I'm calcium deficient." Not the kind of man you want at any family gathering, least of all your own baby shower. Thankfully, I had Olivia, my older sister, a lawyer in Atlanta. Olivia used the law the way most people use salt and pepper, sprinkle it on everything. She could turn a trash violation into a 3-page legal brief. She had told me marrying Lydia was a mistake, but like any good little brother, I ignored her and believed in love. Turns out, she was right, frighteningly right. Back to the baby shower. I had prepared a speech, the usual "thank you for coming," "thank you for the cute gifts," "thank you for not spilling soda on the tiny diapers." I wore a light blue shirt and the classic ugly yellow striped tie my mom swore was youthful. Lydia wore a floral dress, 8 months pregnant, looking like a magazine cover shot of family life, if you ignored the way her eyes kept flicking to her phone. Friends and coworkers filled the room, snapping photos, filming videos, chanting, "One more smile." Everything was fine, until the door opened, and Kevin walked in. Every head turned. He stood there with hair slicked like he'd used motor oil, his white shirt unbuttoned, shoes polished but scuffed at the heel. I swear, he walked like it was a red carpet entrance, only missing a soundtrack. "Baby," Kevin said, loud enough to echo off the ceiling, and he looked only at Lydia. The room fell, silent. I heard the clink of a spoon against a glass at the nearest table. One coworker froze with half a cupcake in her mouth. The air thickened like a slab of stale cheesecake. What did people expect me to do? Throw a chair? Pound the table? Scream, "Traitor"? Number. I did what I do best. I stood still, watched, and poured myself another cup of tea. The crowd swallowed hard. Lydia froze, her eyes darting. Kevin smirked, convinced he'd just dropped a bomb. What he didn't know was this was only the opening act. And here's where I invite you to join the game. If you've ever seen a family gathering collapse into live theater, drop me a comment. Tell me where you're watching from: Texas, Florida, or some small town where drama grows faster than weeds. I'd bet every state has at least one baby shower that turned into a reality TV episode. A few months before that baby shower, everything still looked normal, as if my marriage was just another warm cup of tea in the morning. We ate cereal for breakfast. Lydia flipped through her home decor magazines, and I graded history papers that read like, "Columbus discovered America by Uber." But I'd read enough history to know this: every empire begins to fall through tiny cracks, and marriage is no different. The first crack came with the phone. Lydia started taking it into the bathroom. Now, I don't mind anyone checking their email while brushing their teeth, but Lydia wasn't just checking. She locked the door, let the running water cover the sound of typing, and walked out with a dreamy smile, like she'd just finished a Hallmark marathon. One time I knocked to remind her that hot water in our house cost more than gold. She cracked the door, squinting, and said, "I'm just tired." Tired? Last I checked, phones don't have a sleep mode for humans. Then there were the late nights. She said she was out shopping for baby supplies, but when I asked which store, her answers were so vague that even my 10th graders wouldn't have bought it. Somewhere downtown, a new place. In Asheville, anything new makes the local paper, and the church ladies gossip within hours. Yet I saw no article, heard no chatter. I just nodded, sipped my beer, and thought, sure, must be as classified as Area 51. One morning, I left for school at 6. I forgot my lesson plan and doubled back. When I opened the living room door, Lydia sat cross-legged on the sofa, phone in hand, giggling like a 16-year-old. The screen's glow lit her face, and at the top of the message thread, 3 big letters stared back at me. K. I froze at the doorway, shoes still wet with dew. Lydia jumped, slamming the phone face down like a kid caught stealing cookies. "What are you doing back?" she asked, voice a pitch too high. I smiled. "Lesson plan. Forgot it." Then I walked out, but in my head I stamped that red letter K into a secret file. Who the hell was K? When you start doubting, the whole world turns into a multiple choice test with 4 wrong answers, and 1 right one you haven't circled yet. I noticed more. Lydia typed faster than I could grade essays. She kept her phone face down on the dinner table instead of face up like before. And she claimed she was tired, so often I started to think I was living with a patient from an imaginary illness instead of a pregnant woman. Then came the little shock in her office drawer. I was looking for a paperclip and found a sleek silver USB. Not one of those cheap freebies the teachers' union handed out, but a polished stick engraved with KD. Strange. I plugged it in. Inside were odd financial files, transfers, spreadsheets, nameless documents. I wasn't an accountant, but I knew one thing. When your wife hides a USB full of money, it isn't a diaper shopping list. I slid it back into place, said nothing, and kept my silence. Olivia, my sister, came over that weekend. We sat in my small kitchen with coffee. I hinted at what I'd seen. She frowned, set her mug down with a thud like a gavel. "Marcus, don't dismiss files like that. When a woman starts tucking papers into pink envelopes, they're not utility bills." I laughed it off, told her not to exaggerate, but I knew Olivia rarely missed. She could smell fraud 3 states away. The days blurred. I taught history, but my mind stayed home. I graded a paper and read George Washington as George Wishington, because Lydia and that letter K sat on my brain. I took out the trash and saw Lydia sign for a package from a delivery guy who looked nothing like UPS. A receipt slipped out, signed with a name I didn't know. I asked, and she rattled off an answer so rehearsed it could have been on cue cards. A friend asked me to hold it. Which friend? No name ever came. The cracks grew wider, like a roof leaking in a storm. And I tried to ignore them. But I didn't explode. I wasn't the type to slam the table and shout, "I know everything." I'm a history teacher. I knew empires collapse fastest when rulers rush. I chose to watch, to remember, and to wait. At night, I lie in bed watching Lydia's back, her fingers flicking across the screen. I wondered if that letter K was sitting in her inbox right then. The sound of tapping, quick, happy. A soft sigh, almost a laugh. I rolled toward the wall, beer belly pressing the sheets, and thought, "Marcus, you're becoming a side character in your own marriage." But instead of shouting, I did what I do best. I stayed quiet. Quiet like an archaeologist, waiting for the shards to rise from the dirt. And I knew, sooner or later, that the silver USB and the mysterious K would link together into one full story. I didn't know that the story would explode right in the middle of the baby shower, in front of family, friends, and coworkers. Back then, I was only tracing the cracks, watching the lines spread through the house I thought was solid. And sometimes, the cracks themselves are the map that leads straight to the truth. When friends and family decided to throw us a baby shower, I thought the hardest choice I'd face would be cake flavor or tablecloth color. Honestly, both looked the same to me. You eat one, you toss the other. Yet there I was, standing in a party store with a balloon catalog in hand, laughing at myself. Who would have guessed I was prepping for a WWE match? The only difference was, no TV network was paying the audience, and I'd probably be the one tossed out of the ring. The community cafe downtown was the chosen spot, usually home to book clubs, knitting circles, and men whose beards were longer than the mortgage waiting list. It had that cozy feel, creaky wooden ceilings, and long tables that could seat a few dozen people. The first time I saw it, I thought, perfect place for a baby shower. At least if there's drama, people will mistake it for improv theater. Everyone was excited. Friends and coworkers chatted nonstop. My sister Olivia texted from Atlanta that she'd fly in to witness it firsthand. The way she said it sounded more like she was prepping for a trial than a party. And truthfully, with Olivia, there wasn't much difference. She watched people like a judge studies witnesses, always tilting her head, eyes narrowed, fingers on her chin. Lydia, on the other hand, looked restless. She agreed to attend, but her gaze kept drifting, like her mind was balancing another set of numbers. I asked, "Are you happy?" She smiled, but it was the smile of a waitress trying to upsell dessert. I tried convincing myself her nerves were just hormones, just pregnancy stress. All the excuses family psychology books love to print, but part of me knew something was off. I started noticing small things. Emma, Lydia's cousin, who had never been particularly close to me, suddenly threw herself into the planning. When she mentioned a surprise, she gave that sly grin that makes you double-check your door locks. I asked, "What kind of surprise?" Emma only shook her head and said, "You'll see." A chill went down my spine. Surprises from her family were rarely the kind you wanted served with potato salad. Meanwhile, Kevin started showing up near my school. One afternoon, I spotted him leaning against an old car in the parking lot, pretending to be on the phone. My students brushed past him, thinking he was just another parent. But no parent I knew wore his shirt unbuttoned 3 down and posed like he was waiting for a photo shoot in a bargain magazine. I didn't confront him. I just watched from a distance, thinking, yep, he's auditioning for a role in the drama of my life. Still, I kept playing the part of normal husband. I helped pick the menu: chicken sandwiches, potato salad, pink and blue cupcakes. I signed the catering invoice like I was part of some sacred ritual, when really, I was signing the script for a play I hadn't rehearsed. The night before the shower, Olivia arrived. We sat in the living room, me with a beer, her with tea. She watched Lydia hurry upstairs, then leaned toward me. "Marcus, you see it, don't you?" she whispered. "She's as tense as a witness about to be called." I sighed. "It's a baby shower, not a courtroom." Olivia smirked. "For you, maybe. For Lydia, I'm not so sure." I tossed and turned all night. I thought about the letter K on Lydia's phone, the silver USB in her drawer, Kevin lurking by my school, Emma's sly grin. The pieces didn't yet fit together, but the feeling was clear. Tomorrow wouldn't be a happy day. It would be comedy or tragedy, depending on what you called it. The next morning, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the yellow striped tie my mom had given me. Ugly, sure, but at least I knew it was more loyal than some people in that party room. Lydia wore a floral dress, magazine cover beautiful, but her eyes darted like she was waiting on an emergency call. I carried a gift box from my coworkers out the door thinking, this is it. Today's the day the Ellery family history gets rewritten. With luck, it won't end in folding chairs flying like WWE. The cafe was decorated with pink and blue balloons, floral tablecloths, and a welcome baby banner drooping across the wall. Friends swarmed us with hugs and cheers. I smiled, shook hands, played the happy dad-to-be. Olivia stood in the corner, eyes locked on Lydia like a hawk on a mouse. Emma floated around with that secretive grin, whispering to Lydia now and then. I sipped my coffee, scanning the room, and mocked myself again. Imagine it, Marcus. Everyone's expecting a perfect family photo, and you're bracing for the worst scene of your life. Baby shower or courtroom hearing? Hard to tell. I didn't know exactly what was coming, but my gut, and the look in Olivia's eyes, told me one thing. This party wasn't about celebration. It was the opening act of a tragicomedy, and I was the unwilling lead. At first, the baby shower was so perfect it almost convinced me my suspicions were nothing but paranoia. Pink and blue balloons dangled from the ceiling. Sunlight poured through the cafe windows, and the whole place looked like a spread from a family magazine. Friends and coworkers walked in with brightly wrapped gifts. A few of my older teacher colleagues fussed over how radiant Lydia looked, and my students presented a shoebox stuffed with hand-scribbled notes. One kid even wrote, "Hope you get a little warrior to help you fight homework." I had to laugh. The server set down trays of cupcakes. Twinkle Twinkle played softly in the background, and everyone laughed, snapped photos, called for more smiles. I stood beside Lydia, arm around her waist, playing the role of happiest husband alive. In the pictures, maybe I looked exactly that, but inside, I was counting the seconds, waiting for the first crack to show. When the room urged me to give a thank you speech, I stood with a teacup in hand and tried to sound warm. Thank you all for being here, for supporting us. I hope our son or daughter will grow up surrounded by people as wonderful as you. My voice sounded steady, cheerful. Someone shouted, "Cheers!" and the room filled with applause. Lydia smiled, but her eyes weren't fixed on me. They were fixed on the door, like she was waiting for a special guest. And right on cue, the cafe door swung open. Kevin Doyle strutted in like the leading man of a bad cable movie airing at 2 in the morning. White shirt unbuttoned, 3 down, hair slicked like he'd bathed in motor oil, shoes shined but wobbling on his feet like a failed audition. He stopped at the threshold, locked eyes with Lydia, and flashed that half-smile he thought was charming, but looked more like a used car salesman pushing a lemon. "Baby," he said, his voice booming across the room. The chatter evaporated instantly. Someone froze mid-bite on a cupcake. A spoon clinked against glass. The air thickened, heavy as cheesecake left out too long. I could hear my own heartbeat and the hiss of a balloon deflating onto the floor. Kevin wasn't done. His next words came sharper. "We should tell the truth about the baby, shouldn't we?" No one laughed. No one coughed. The room turned to stone. Every eye swung to me. Lydia's face went pale, her hand trembling until the glass rattled. Emma, her cousin, melted into the corner, her sly smile gone. Olivia stood arms crossed, gaze sharper than a blade, watching like a judge catching perjury. And me? I sat down, lifted the teapot, and poured myself another cup. The silence was thicker than the cheesecake I'd half eaten. I sipped the tea, bitter down my throat, and thought, so this is the main course. I looked up at the room, everyone waiting for me to explode, flip a table, at least throw a tablecloth in the air. Instead, I smiled, calm as if I were watching a car insurance commercial during halftime. Lydia opened her mouth, tried to speak, but the words jammed in her throat. Kevin stepped further in, puffing up like he owned the lease. "Baby," he repeated, pointing straight at Lydia. "I think we shouldn't hide anymore." The whispers started. A coworker muttered, "What the hell is this?" Another looked at me with pity, like I was a student being mocked by the class. I set my teacup down, dabbed the rim with a napkin, and said evenly, "Kevin, you should sit down. We're short one supporting actor." A few chuckles broke out, quickly smothered by tension. Lydia stammered, "Marcus, I don't know why he," but fell silent when Olivia arched an eyebrow. She didn't need to say it. Her eyes made it clear. Let him speak. Let him bury himself. Kevin, thinking he had the upper hand, turned to the crowd, raising his voice. "Lydia and we've been seeing each other. And this baby," he gestured toward her belly, "this baby might not be Marcus's." If anyone had been filming, that moment would have gone viral as top 10 shocking family party moments. The room gasped. A friend of Lydia's dropped her spoon, the clang echoing. My mother, seated in the corner, covered her mouth, eyes wide. I stayed seated, leaned back, fingers around my cup. My voice came slow and steady. "Kevin, you're late. Baby shower gifts are supposed to be brought at the start, not halfway through. Still, I'll give you credit. Not many people are bold enough to gift something this toxic." The silence deepened, but I caught a glimmer in a few eyes, the dawning realization that I wouldn't collapse into the scene Kevin imagined. Lydia looked at me, pale, sweat glistening on her forehead. Kevin faltered, thrown off, but tried to hold his stance. I finished my tea, set the cup down, and glanced at Olivia. She said nothing, only gave a small nod, like confirming that this trial had officially begun. In my head, every piece clicked into place. The letter K on Lydia's phone, the silver USB, her constant fatigue, Emma's sly grin. And now the man behind the K stood in front of everyone, exposing the play they had staged. I didn't react the way they expected. No shouting, no table flipping, no calls for security. I just sat there like a man with front row tickets, watching their cheap performance unfold. And I knew this wasn't the climax. It was only the opening act. When Kevin stormed into the baby shower, called Lydia baby, and hinted that the child wasn't mine, a normal husband might have lost his mind. I didn't. I poured more tea, finished my cheesecake, and watched the room reel like Elvis had just risen from the dead. They expected me to explode, but history taught me one truth. Empires don't collapse from shouting. They collapse from records, cold facts, and evidence no one can deny. I chose silence, and I began to play chess. That night, Olivia pulled me out onto the porch, leaving Lydia and Kevin fumbling through excuses inside. The Asheville air was cool, carrying the scent of coffee from the cafe. Olivia folded her arms, her voice sharp as a blade. "Marcus, you can't fight with fists. You need proof. The kind a courtroom won't laugh at." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Years of teaching taught me that victory comes through documents, numbers, and truths written in black ink on white paper. And Olivia, with her lawyer's mind, knew exactly where to look. The next day I drove to Knoxville, Tennessee, to meet a private investigator Olivia recommended. His name was Hank Morrison, a wiry man with salt and pepper hair and an unlit cigarette always between his lips. He studied me like an open book. "Who do you want to follow?" I swallowed. "My wife, and a man named Kevin Doyle." Hank smirked, nodded. "The oldest story in the world. Lucky for you, Knoxville is small. And guys like Kevin, overconfident, flashy, they're as easy to track as cheap cologne." I left him photos, Lydia's basic schedule, and a retainer Olivia told me to treat as an investment. Back in Asheville, I taught as usual, lecturing about the Civil War, my mouth talking about Lincoln, while my head replayed images of Hank tailing Lydia. Every night I sat in my study, staring at that silver USB glinting in her drawer, daring me to act. A week later, Hank called. His voice was gravelly but clear. "You don't want to hear this." I grabbed a notebook, pen shaking in my hand. "Tell me." He laid it out. Lydia drove to a small apartment on the outskirts of Knoxville, where Kevin appeared regularly. They stayed for hours, sometimes overnight. The lease was in Lydia's name but tied to a separate email address, with money transfers from a bank account I'd never seen. Hank sent photos. Lydia and Kevin hand in hand, door half open, curtains drawn. I stared at them the way I grade failed papers, every answer wrong. The sting wasn't just the affair. The sting was that Lydia was thinking I was too stupid to notice, that I'd stay the soft history teacher grading essays, believing K stood for kindness. I sent everything to Olivia. She wasn't surprised. She only sighed. "This is just the start. We follow the money." That apartment didn't appear out of thin air. I requested bank statements. Exactly as Olivia predicted, there were steady withdrawals, small enough, and a freeloading boyfriend. I never confronted Lydia. I didn't ask, accuse, or sit across the table waiting for a confession. I kept my mornings the same. Coffee, school, dinner. The only difference was at night. At night, I opened my laptop and filed every piece of evidence neatly into a folder I named Truth_31. 31. Lydia's age. And this truth was my belated birthday gift to her. Watching that folder grow, photos, PDFs, bank records, PI notes, I stopped feeling like the victim. I was the grader. And Lydia and Kevin were turning in a term paper made of lies. One night, Hank asked me over the phone, "You planning to hit him? Most husbands want that." I laughed, shook my head, though he couldn't see. "Number. I'll let the law do the hitting." Punching Kevin is like punching an empty bag. I want him shackled by his own signatures. Hank chuckled, impressed. Colder than I thought. Good, cold men survive longer. Ironically, Lydia kept playing the perfect wife in public. She smiled through dinners, fussed over my mother's health, and chatted about baby names. I nodded, polite, while inside I built the day I'd open Truth 31 in front of everyone. One night, grading papers, I found a student had written, "The Civil War happened because the North didn't like Southern barbecue." I laughed, shaking my head, then thought, Lydia and Kevin are the same, rewriting history in ridiculous ways, but I've got the original sources. They thought I was just a teacher marking multiple choice tests, but I was grading their performance too, and their score was worse than any failing essay from ninth grade. I saved the last file to Truth 31, closed the laptop, and sat in the dark. Out there, Lydia might believe she was winning. Kevin might think he'd secured the lead role. But I knew better. The board was set, and I was the only one sitting at it, calm, hand on the pieces, waiting for the opening move. One thing Hank, the Knoxville PI, did better than most was this. He didn't just hand you clues, he handed you a whole illustrated novel. One late afternoon, while I was grading essays on the American Revolution, one kid wrote that Washington beat the British by running faster. My phone buzzed. Hank said, "I just gathered a few things. Don't open while eating dinner." He sent me a folder of photos, and after that I didn't need dinner. There was Lydia and Kevin in a dim bar, faces pressed close. Another shot of them outside the secret apartment. Lydia wearing the floral dress I'd praised that very morning. Matches your eyes. Then Kevin with a pharmacy bag. Lydia behind him, belly round, smoothie cup in hand. But the picture that hollowed me out was Lydia handing Kevin the ultrasound. In that grainy frame I saw the blur I once thought was proof of love, now glowing on the screen of a man whose only contribution was an unbuttoned shirt. Kevin grinned, holding the phone up, Lydia resting her head on his shoulder. If this was a family portrait, I was the ghost left out of the frame. Then Hank sent a recording. I pressed play, leaning in like I was listening to a primary source in class. Lydia's voice came clear, undeniable. "Marcus will never know. Let him raise it. He's gentle enough." I killed the file, but the words hammered into me. Let him raise it. I, Marcus Ellery, reduced from husband to a living bank account, a man drafted to raise another man's child. I sat in the dark, hand clamped on the mouse until my knuckles went white. I thought I understood betrayal. But betrayal isn't just a secret touch. It's hearing your name turned into a number in someone else's plan. I wanted to scream. I wanted to smash the keyboard. Instead, I opened Truth_31 and made a subfolder called Hammer. Into it went the photos, the messages, the recording. Then I leaned back in my chair, exhaled, and thought, history was right again. The strongest weapon wasn't steel, it was paper. The next day Olivia called. I gave her the short version. She was silent a moment, then her voice came dry as statute. "Marcus, the heaviest blow is when you don't shout, you just press play." I nodded like a student in class. From that day forward, I wasn't the betrayed husband anymore. I was the undercover prosecutor, prepping for a trial no one had announced. At home, Lydia kept playing perfect wife. She asked what I wanted for dinner, talked about bassinets, tossed out baby names, Oliver or Olivia, ironically my sisters. I smiled, nodded, while the phrase, "let him raise it," echoed. Each word struck like a hammer, but instead of breaking me, it forged me. Kevin didn't vanish either. I spotted him around Asheville, sitting in his car, texting, sometimes waving at me with that smirk. I shrugged, as if he were just a background extra in a soap opera. He had no idea I held the final script on my hard drive. Olivia went back to Atlanta nearly every night. "Don't rush, Marcus. I know you want to scream at her now, but your silence is making them sweat more than 100 arguments ever could. And when you bring the truth into the light, you won't need to say a word. Everyone will understand." I listened. I stayed quiet. But my silence wasn't empty. It was the silence of a man drafting his final report. Every digit, every comma. I still taught class, still told stories of Washington crossing the Delaware, but inside, I was building my own bridge, from victim to architect. Every night I opened truth_31, checked the files like a guard checking weapons. I replayed the recording, this time steady. Lydia's voice again. Marcus will never know. And I smirked. Wrong, Lydia. Marcus knows. Marcus knows everything. I thought of my ninth graders, the ones who butchered history dates. I used to write in red across their papers. Truth can't be revised to fit your preference. Now, I was applying the same lesson to my marriage. Lydia and Kevin could rewrite their little romance, but the truth was already saved. In WAV, JPG, and PDF. One evening Olivia texted, "When the time comes, let them fall on their own. You don't need to push." I replied, "Don't worry. All I need is to press play." I shut the laptop and looked around the living room where Lydia used to sit giggling at her phone. I remembered that morning. I saw the letter K on her screen. Back then it was just a crack. Now I held the hammer, ready to bring the whole facade down. And I knew the day would come. In front of family, friends, in the very crowd where they thought I'd collapse. But instead of collapsing, I would stand, pour my tea, press play, and let the world hear Lydia's voice. Marcus will never know. Let him raise it. Yes, Lydia, I know. And I won't raise this lie one more day. If you thought the baby shower was chaotic, wait until the so-called pre-birth dinner in Charlotte, North Carolina. Lydia's family wanted a grand party to welcome the baby. I called it an unannounced trial, because this time I didn't come empty-handed. In my bag, next to grade books and a few red pens, sat the silver USB labeled truth_31 and a small laptop. A mild-mannered history teacher was about to turn into a prosecutor. The banquet hall in downtown Charlotte was far fancier than the Asheville Cafe. Chandeliers sparkled, white linens draped the tables, and staff in vests hustled with trays. Lydia's entire family was there. Her mother, grandparents, distant aunts, and of course, Kevin, the great intruder. He was dressed to impress, a tie so purple it looked like forged grades. I watched him raise a glass with that smirk and saw nothing but a second-rate actor mangling his lines. I sat beside Olivia, my sister, who had flown in from Atlanta like a defense attorney at a high-profile trial. She whispered, "You sure?" I nodded, fingers brushing the bag. It's time. The evening began with toasts. Everyone raised glasses and recited empty lines about love, family, and a bright future. I lifted mine too. But in my head I thought, my bright future sits on this USB, and they're about to watch fireworks. Lydia wore a pale blue dress, forcing a smile, trying to look calm. Kevin sat closer than he needed to, his hand draped over the back of her chair like a flag of ownership. I sipped my tea and swallowed a laugh. When the room lifted glasses again, I quietly set my laptop on the table and slid the USB in. The projector was already wired to play a family slideshow. I asked to test a short memory video. They agreed without question. To them I was harmless, the teacher husband likely showing a few handmade cards from students. But when the shaky footage lit up the wall, the room froze. It wasn't a slideshow. It wasn't a scrapbook. It was a video of Kevin in the secret apartment, cigarette in hand, laughing smugly. His voice boomed clear, undeniable. "Money from Marcus makes it airtight. He doesn't know a thing. Let him raise it, who cares?" The sound fell into the room like a sledgehammer. Forks stopped mid-air. Wine glasses rattled in trembling hands. Lydia's mother gasped. An aunt whispered, "Lord have mercy." Lydia went pale. Kevin shot to his feet, face flushed, words choking in his throat. The atmosphere collapsed in an instant. Toasts, smiles, and flowery words evaporated. Silence pressed heavily, broken only by the hiss of speakers and ragged breaths of the guilty. I sat there calm, as if screening a documentary for class. I let the footage roll a few more seconds. Kevin boasting about a discreet apartment. Lydia giggling in the background. Evidence beyond denial. When I cut the video, every eye turned to me. waiting for a scream. Steady. No need for volume. I don't need to shout. The truth is loud enough. Then I stood, closed the laptop, and slipped the USB back into my bag. No one stopped me. No one found words. I walked out of the room through a silence thick as stone, leaving behind a dinner-turned-courtroom. Verdict delivered in Kevin's own voice. Olivia followed, her heels striking sharply on the marble floor. As we pushed open the doors to the Charlotte night, cool wind rushed in. Behind us, the room erupted, Lydia's mother screaming, Kevin stammering, Lydia sobbing. Too late. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The record had been written, and the truth had fallen like a hammer, right in front of them all. When I walked out of that Charlotte dinner, I knew the play wasn't over. It had only moved to the next act. And this time, Olivia, my sister, held the script. And she wasn't the kind of writer who did romance. She wrote in the language of law, dry, cold, and suffocating. When the final signature landed, the other side would feel buried alive. The very next morning, Olivia and I went to a law office in Charlotte. She placed the silver USB, truth_31, on the desk and looked straight at the attorney. This is both audio and visual evidence. My client, Marcus Ellery, requires immediate legal protection. The attorney nodded, eyes lighting up like he'd struck gold. First step, file with the court. Olivia submitted both a motion for DNA testing and a motion to review Lydia's finances. I asked, "You sure about this?" Olivia sipped her coffee, smiled dryly. "Marcus, law is like Southern barbecue. If you want it tender, you cook it slowly. If you want it flavorful, you marinate it correctly. And right now, I'm soaking the opposition in lemon juice." The DNA test was rushed. I sat in the hospital waiting room with a paper cup of vending machine coffee, trembling in my hands. If the results showed the baby wasn't mine, I had already braced for it. But Olivia kept repeating, "Either way, you win, because you chose the light." 2 weeks later, the results arrived. 99.99% the baby was mine. I laughed, a smile bitter and sweet. Kevin must have smashed a few mirrors when he heard. I didn't care. That ruling alone tipped custody in my favor, unless the court saw me as a danger. And honestly, a history teacher sipping tea never looked dangerous to anyone. Meanwhile, Olivia filed the financial trail. Photos of Lydia wiring money, rental papers for the apartment, and bank statements with suspicious withdrawals. She stacked it all into a thick binder, organized like one of my lesson plans. Section 1, deceit. Section 2, concealment. Section 3, scheme. On court day, the Charlotte courtroom was packed. I sat at the plaintiff's table, plain suit, old striped yellow tie. In my hand wasn't a gavel or a speech, just a steaming cup of coffee. Olivia stood beside me, preparing her argument like a conductor tuning an orchestra. Lydia and Kevin sat across. Lydia is black, pale-faced, with dark circles. Kevin tried for confidence, but the wrinkled shirt and sweaty brow betrayed him. I only watched, silent. The judge entered, gavel struck. The hearing began. Olivia opened the laptop, slid in the USB. The familiar voice filled the courtroom. "Kevin, clear as day. Money from Marcus makes it airtight. He doesn't know a thing." The room erupted. The opposing lawyer leapt to object, but Olivia only smiled, dropping in Lydia's voice next. "Marcus will never know. Let him raise it. No commentary needed." "This is your voice?" Lydia stammered, eyes down. Kevin tried to cut in, but Olivia sliced his words apart. "Your Honor, this is evidence of financial deceit and an active scheme to defraud her legal spouse. Grounds enough for custody and asset review." The courtroom looked exactly like my classroom whenever I rolled in a documentary instead of lecturing. Mouths open, no pushback left. Lydia's head down, Kevin's shaking, their lawyers sinking. I drank my coffee and graded in my head. 0 for honesty, 0 for planning, below 0 for character. The arguments dragged on for hours, but I didn't need to speak. Olivia orchestrated like she was tightening a net. She laid out statements, receipts, and investigator photos. Each piece is another cut. By the end, Lydia slumped. Kevin bit his lip, and their lawyer was out of ammo. Finally, the judge delivered. DNA confirms the child belongs to Mr. Marcus Ellery. With evidence of financial fraud and infidelity, custody is awarded to Mr. Ellery. Lydia and Kevin will face legal consequences for concealment and unlawful use of funds. The courtroom went dead silent. I set down my cup, stood, and nodded to the judge. No cheers, no applause. I had won with the cheapest weapon of all, a Walmart USB loaded with undeniable truth. Olivia took my arm as we walked out. See? No swords needed. Just let them hang themselves with their own words. I laughed, the sarcasm I'd held in for months finally breaking free. Sis, for the first time in my life, grading was easy. And this paper deserves a giant F. The Charlotte sky that day was bright and clear. I drew in a long breath, freedom filling my chest. The game was over, and I was the last one standing. Calm, steady, coffee in hand, walking toward the light. After the trial in Charlotte, my life veered onto a different road, and strangely enough, it was quieter than ever. I left Asheville with a crib, a few boxes of history books, and a child not yet born. I moved to Charleston, South Carolina, where I found work at a small private school teaching American history to kids in uniforms, far better behaved than my old rowdy ninth graders. Each morning, I drove my beat-up car with a cup of hot coffee in the console, watched children run across the schoolyard, and felt life finally leaning in my favor. My new house wasn't big, but it was full of light. I set a wooden desk by the window and placed the ultrasound photo on top, the same one Lydia once sent to Kevin. Now it was mine, and mine alone. At night, I rocked my baby to sleep with stories about Washington crossing the Delaware, or Lincoln writing the Emancipation Proclamation. The baby didn't understand a word, only stirred and drifted back to sleep. But for me, it was the beginning of a new chapter in history. And Lydia and Kevin? They crumbled like a sandcastle hit by waves. After the ruling, Kevin lost his job at the car lot. No one wanted to buy from the man exposed on video as a liar. Lydia became a shadow in her own family, shamed by relatives, abandoned by her mother, and avoided by everyone else. At family gatherings, her absence wasn't because they forgot to invite her, but because no one wanted to look at a walking reminder of disgrace. Sometimes I heard bits of news through friends. Kevin and Lydia squeezed into a dingy apartment on the edge of town, surviving on scraps. They blamed each other, fought loudly, and once bad enough, the neighbors called the cops. I didn't need to lift a hand. They dug their own grave. For them, life had turned into a never-ending, suspended sentence. In my Charleston home, I kept one drawer locked. Inside was the silver USB, truth_31. I didn't open it anymore. I didn't need to. It stood as a symbol of a battle I won without shouting. Every time I caught sight of it, I chuckled. A cheap little USB from Walmart, but strong enough to flip the entire board. I used to think the worst baby shower gift was the wrong size diaper. Tiny newborn packs when what you needed were 6-month size. But no. The worst gift was a divorce file, wrapped in a pink envelope, served with public humiliation. Thanks for that. It fit perfectly. A one-way ticket out of a rotten marriage. Now each morning I brew coffee, carry my child onto the porch, and watch the sun rise over the Charleston River. The bitterness is gone. All that's left is relief. I've learned silence isn't weakness. Silence at the right moment, paired with a lawful strike, is the sharpest weapon a betrayed man can wield. So for those of you watching, I'll leave this message. If you believe silence and a well-timed legal blow are the highest form of revenge, hit subscribe and ring the bell. Of American-style silent revenge. As for me, I'll keep telling my story, not to dwell on the past, but to prove that even a beer-bellied history teacher with ugly ties and a silver USB can rise from the ashes of betrayal. And sometimes, Living well and raising your child strong is the hardest slap you can deliver to people who thought you'd sit quietly and endure forever.